everybody, my beloveds and my Patreon community. I'm so glad that you are here. Today, I am interviewing my dear sister, Roberta Schwartz, and this is our Pontification with a Pro series, so that will have that tag in there. And you all, we're going to dive in deep and talk about grants. And so many of you are interested in applying for grants. As you all know, part of my trajectory involves a grant. And that's how I got my master's completely debt-free, was through a rehab administration grant. And so Roberta has the persuasive pen. I love that name. Isn't that cool? And so she's going to talk to us, as I said, a little bit about writing and grants, and we're going to go from there. So before we dive into your story, Roberta, can you tell us a little bit about the persuasive pen, how you're using that, what that looks like for you today?
Sure. I've been working, I started the persuasive pen over 20 years ago. My background has really been primarily in the arts. And so I had been majoring in art history at Vassar College, which is in Poughkeepsie, New York. And one of my closest friends took a much more practical path. She was a math major. And so I really never thought too much about what it was going to be like to make a living until my senior year, when I realized that art, well, I mean, I wasn't that naive, but you know, I was just basically going with my passion. And I, as a kid, loved to go to museums and, you know, loved surrounding myself with other artists and listening to artists. And so that was just something. And I had a terrific teacher in high school who was an art history teacher. So to me, it seemed like a really natural trajectory. But when I was graduating from college and I had applied for all these jobs, and my college roommate, who was a math major, had all these options to apply for, and she was getting jobs right and left. And I, on the other hand, had far more limited possibility. And so what I did was, after I graduated, I found out from a professor I had, who told me about a grant that was available that I could work on. It was a National Endowment for the Arts grant that I could work on for another year after college, at the college. And so I had to sort of, you know, work within the perimeters of that grant, and also write grant updates as to what I was doing to make sure that, you know, I was doing what I needed to be doing. And then, you know, I applied to graduate school and was lucky to receive funding to do my graduate work. And, you know, and one of the good things that I remember hearing about was, don't take loans out for graduate school. You know, rather than doing a master's program, do a PhD, which to me at the time seemed like, oh my God, that's a huge endeavor. I'd rather do a master's. It's, you know, 2 years. It's less time. But I did go for the PhD, and that really helped me get through without incurring. I did take out one grant. I did take out one loan, rather, for $3,000.
Wow. I did not know I should be calling you Dr. Schwartz.
No. I haven't. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I finished all my coursework. I finished my exams. I wrote several chapters of my dissertation. But my husband is an English professor, and the possibility of us getting 2 jobs in the same city was really limited. So that's when I decided to redirect my attention and go into grant writing, because I'd had success getting grants, and I really liked the idea of writing grants because they're short and they have a deadline.
Yeah.
And a deadline to me is really, really important. A PhD doesn't have a deadline. It can go on and on and on.
Yes.
And so, So I realized, I started writing grants for cultural institutions. I worked for the Strong Museum, which is in Rochester, New York. And at the time it was a cultural history museum. And so I wrote grants for that. And it was an interesting combination of things of, sort of keeping history, cultural history, art history in my thoughts, but also, writing grants and working with curators and working with archivists and historians. And, but again, focusing on projects that are much shorter, much more abbreviated. And that's one of the things I love about grants is that every single word counts. You don't, sometimes academics can be really accused of being really wordy, kind of pretentious, not speaking to a large audience. And with a grant, you've got to speak to a larger audience, because in many cases, if you get the grant, that project is supposed to be directed to a really broad public.
Right.
And I also love to edit. So to me, it's just like a great opportunity where it's succinct, it's got to be persuasive, it's got to be well crafted. And it also, has a broader audience that in many cases academic projects don't have that possibility. And so I've enjoyed it. At this point, when I first started off, there was, you never, you'd have to make multiple copies of every proposal. So you'd be making like 12 copies of proposal, and then the not-for-profit status and all the documents about the board of trustees. And you'd have these enormous, they look like a federal grants, even for smaller foundations. Now it's much more streamlined. You're applying online. And one of the reasons that I've been able to work with the King Center, which I've really enjoyed doing now for the past little over a year, is that because everything is online now, I can do this job remotely.
Right.
In many cases, I've been able to work with clients all over the country. And that's been really exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm also working for a museum in Washington, D.C. now. And I recently starting my own not-for-profit, which is called the City of Asylum in Rochester. And that is going to be directed to housing a persecuted writer who's been identified by the Penn Foundation to have the opportunity to be safe. Perhaps we'll have a Ukrainian writer be safe and to get back to the job of writing. And I feel confident that I can do this with the 501c3 because of my grant writing abilities.
Right.
That I can continue to, work with the community, find funding through private foundations, through, hopefully corporations. I don't know if that's going to be as easy as private foundations, but again, I know that often, when people ask me what I do for a living, I think they think it's rather dull. But, to me, the possibilities are limitless.
Exactly.
It really gives me an opportunity to meet new people, whether on Zoom or, in person. It gives me the opportunity to learn about new organizations and to see what they're up to. It gives me hope that, that the world is not just taking, but is also giving. And I really do enjoy working with younger people. So I encourage people to, if you do have an interest in learning about grant writing, to give me a call or, email me, or Dr. Ross can provide you with the information. But
absolutely.
But I have mentored other people, and I'm not scary to work with. So if you happen to be in Rochester, New York, I do a lot of baking, so I'll make you a cake.
Oh, well, I'm coming to Rochester then.
I encourage you to do so.
I want to. I really want to. I really want to connect a few dots for my students that are tuning in. So I want you all to understand that as an undergrad, she focused on her passion, which is super important. Obviously, I believe in that intersection of like the Japanese ikigai, which is that intersection of, what are my passions? What am I good at? What does the world need? And what can I get paid for? And so you look at those concentric circles, and there in the middle is one of those things. And really, Roberta, you're a great example of that, because you have your passion for the arts, and yet the world needs grant writers, and you love grant writing, and you can get paid for that. And it's a way to, I had a student several years ago that was really interested in historic preservation. Was really interested in interior design, but she didn't want to work with, high-end multimillionaire Atlanta housewives. She wanted to figure out a different way to make an impact. And so we did some exploration, and she landed on historical preservation because it had that aesthetic, the underlying, interior design aspect, but also a way that she could give back, and a way that she could really make sort of a lasting difference if she was doing something, say, for a museum or something like that. And so it's important to find that. And I want my students to understand that sometimes you do something for a specific reason, and then you develop a skill set that could, like with Roberta, become the crux of your career, or it certainly can enhance your career. And we talk oftentimes about graduating debt-free, having that end in mind, and how that alters your trajectory, but you don't always understand the skills that you're building and how that's going to show up later down the road. Wow. So I love the name of your organization, The Persuasive Pen. I just think that's beautiful. I love words. I call my husband the wordsmith, and we love words. And so I think that's beautiful. But in preparation for this interview, Roberta, you and I were talking, and I wrote down this quote because I was asking you, just sort of off the cuff, what advice would you give to college students in writing grants? And in a minute, then I want to talk about looking for grants, but specifically in writing for grants. And you said, write succinctly, ask persuasively. Write succinctly, write persuasively, and ask questions. And so can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. I think the first thing is, when I talk about writing succinctly, is with a grant, it's the kind of thing where there are so many people applying for this grant. And so the people who are reading the grants and making the decisions as to whether or not they're going to get awarded are trying to weed out the grants, because they're getting, 500, maybe 1,000, and there are only a few that they're going to award. And so consequently, you've got to play by the rules. You've got to keep it to a minimum as far as the number of words go, because no one wants to read and read and read and not recognize what is the need, what are the objectives of the program, how are you going to evaluate the program, why is it a program that really needs to be funded. Mm-hmm. And how is it going to be able to sustain itself? Because funders don't want to just fund one thing and then find that it's going to disappear after a few years. The other thing that they don't want to do is they don't want to fund a project where they are the only people giving money to the project. They want to know that it's going to go on and take on a life of its own and have broader support. So it's really important to write succinctly, to write persuasively, to show how critical this program is and how far-reaching the program is too, and to get your reader really excited about it. Mm-hmm. So that's where that comes in. But at the same time, I think the other part of writing grants is asking questions, and also when I'm writing, it's not a novel. It's not about me. And it's not a memoir. It's not a biography. What it is it's a kind of partnership between the organization that I'm writing for and the funder, the people that are given the money. And so I've got to be kind of a chameleon. You know, I've got to figure out how I'm going to sort of move the narrative, how I'm going to move the wording and show that not only is it a great project for the institution that's planning to have it, but it's also critical to the funder too, that it's going to enhance their image too. And I think that's part of the fun of being a grant writer is I move away from myself. Actually, I'd rather think about somebody else anyhow. So, and it's a bit of a game, you know, what are the moving parts and how are you going to adjust them? So the genuine meaning comes out and you're satisfying both.
I'm sorry, you go ahead. You go ahead.
No, just you're satisfying the organization and you're satisfying the people that are writing the check.
Yeah. You know, in nonviolence, we talk about finding the win-win. And oftentimes our culture will say, never look for the win-win. Always pick a team and let's be divisive. You know, and so what you're doing, Roberta, is you're taking the funders' parameters, you're taking the organization's structure and objectives, and you're pulling out the things of commonality, right, and making those win-wins. And that's such a beautiful way to spend your day. You know, it's a much harder day, I believe, to spend my day saying, these are all the things I'm against. Or, right, you know, these are whatever. So I think that that's beautiful.
Well, thank you. I also find that, you know, it's funny when you mentioned that, in a sense, being a grant writer is almost trying to construct the perfect world, you know, where everybody is happy and everybody's going to benefit and, right, you know, the world's going to be a better place. And, you know, it's a good way to spend time.
Yes,
know?
It is.
I mean, so again, I encourage people to consider it. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a grant writer. I don't think there are many people. I don't think there's anybody who grows up thinking they're going to be a grant writer. But
right.
It's been a good fit.
Good. Do you have any advice for my students for how to find grants that can fund them going to some sort of education? So I've got a lot of students, obviously, looking to undergrad, but then I do have some graduate students. In particular, the one area where folks seem to really struggle is with law, and I know your son is well versed in that, and the medical/dental. I just talked to somebody, a dentist, the other day that said, you know, I'm in debt. I think he said $400,000.
Oh my goodness! Oh,
yeah,
that's horrible.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's kind of a two-part question, you know, overall, how do college students, folks who want to use grants to fund their education, and then in those specific areas, the legal or medical field, if you've got some advice.
Right. I mean, for the most part, with the grants that I've written, they've been for organizations as opposed to individuals. However, I do know that, you know, I never neglect your public library. That's something that's really, really important. And I would recommend going into, you know, your public library and talking to one of the librarians and asking them, you know, tell them that you're interested in applying for scholarships. What kinds of books do they have that can tell you more? I know that there are directories for individuals who are applying to college, and I don't know the specific names of them, but if you go into the library and ask them about directories that can help them get scholarships and for undergraduate and graduate. The other thing is that, and this, you know, varies from school to school. I know that the high schools that I've worked with, you know, do have guidance counselors who sometimes make these scholarships available to students, the list of them. And I would really encourage, you know, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of bad guidance counselors out there. So, I mean, there's some good ones too, but you know, when you're in high school too, I think you're less motivated to seek them out. But I I would encourage you to do so, you know, and ask them about scholarships, because the more scholarships that are available and the more that are received by students at particular high schools, the better off the high schools look too. So, you know, it is kind of a win-win situation. But I'd really urge you to get to know your library, and because all of these public libraries do have funding directories, online or offline, and there are things available. So I can look into that and back to you about that too.
Great tip. Great tip. Yeah. So anything specifically about either the legal field or the medical field?
Yeah, I know that my son has been applying. He wants to go to a public school at a state university in New York at Buffalo. And one of the reasons that he's chosen that law school there is that it is public. It's less expensive than the private ones. And he has been in touch with financial aid. And they have encouraged him to get in touch with them as early as possible, so that, you know, he has not been accepted yet, but I told him, you know, get in there and talk to them, you know, call them up, make appointments, whatever, because there are, I know that, and I've looked on their website too, and they do have scholarships available.
Excellent.
So I would, you know, urge students who are applying to specific law schools or medical schools or direct, you know, dental schools or whatever, get in touch with the financial aid officer at that particular institution, and then ask them about, you know, specific scholarships that are available, because I think all these places do have scholarships. Well, a lot of them aren't that big.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you get one, then it kind of looks good. It looks very good. And then you can, you know, and apply for more, and you have a firmer foundation. The other thing is that I think if you are with medical school and law school, I don't know about dental school, but if you will make a commitment to working, say, in public law, or to being a medical student who is going to serve greater public, you know, in rural areas and underserved areas, then in many cases, I know that they are, you know, then dropping the price of tuition. So I think it's really important to have conversations with the people who are making the decisions at financial aid to, you know, to ask about that, and not be afraid of picking up the phone or making an appointment, because so what if they say no? You know, you figure out your next step, and you kind of learn from that. So
it really goes back to your earlier advice of asking questions. Because we need to ask those questions of ourselves, like, how can I find this? How can I find that? Okay, let me think about that. And then find the people that you could ask questions of. And then they may encourage you to ask questions to other people. And then, you know, and that advice about the financial aid officer definitely is absolutely applicable. I tell the story about when I was in higher ed, my office had a scholarship assigned to it that I would award every year. And of course, this was, you know, before cell phones. And so I was sending emails to my students. And even back then, they weren't necessarily reading all my emails. But the students that came by, I would mention it to them. So it just turned out that the more proximity they had with me, the more often they heard about it. And that's who was awarded it, because there wasn't anybody who read the email that rarely came by my office that applied even. So, you know, it is something about proximity and building a relationship, which is so important. And that's, I mean, that's also a critical life skill for them.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, it can be a really intimidating experience. I mean, I'm working with one young woman now who is so, you know, concerned about falling behind. You know, she'll say to me, I'm 25 years old and all of my other friends are doing this, this, and this. And, you know, what am I going to do? And, you know, you got to understand that you're still young, you got time. And at the same time, you know, you talk to people and you try and get a perspective that is more realistic and less, you know, abusive to yourself. And again, not being afraid to ask questions. And even if the person is brusque or, you know, seems a bit on the nasty side, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
Or if it doesn't seem like it's worth giving them the benefit of the doubt, then, you know, then seeking other avenues. Don't be afraid once someone has said no to you that you can't go to somebody else. Because it's, you know, it's a big world out there, and there are a lot of people that really do want to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's my.
Roberta, you are such a delight. I tell you this all the time off of Zoom. And so in front of my community, I just want to say thank you so much. I am so deeply grateful that you would share your expertise with us. And
I appreciate you too. And I always enjoy working with you and seeing you and talking to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.